where we delve into the heart of what truly matters, our families. Healthy families make healthy societies. I'm Randy.
And I'm Lesli. We're diving deep into the powerful insights of Dr. Randy's groundbreaking book, The Family Legacy: Shaping Culture from the Inside Out.
Hear inspiring stories and strategies to transform your family. We'll explore topics like communication, forgiveness, healing, parenting, marriage. We'll cover it all.
We'll have provoking conversations with experts, coaches, and real-life families who are benefiting from intentional family building.
This podcast isn't just about theories, it's about tools that you can implement today.
We all come from families, so this podcast is for you.
Join us on this incredible family journey. Subscribe now as we learn to do family as God designed.
Transforming families one episode at a time. Remember, whoever wins the family wins the culture in the end. Let's go. Welcome back to Transforming Families with Randy and Lesli. I am Lesli.
And I'm Randy.
Listen, guys, we're super excited. We're starting a new series around marriage, and it's going to culminate, I can talk this morning, into a 6-week marriage challenge that we are calling Unified. So don't check out if you're divorced or not married yet. This is rich information. It will heal you if you're divorced. It will enhance your marriage and let you know for real what marriage is supposed to be like if you're not there yet.
Yeah. And this marriage challenge that we're calling Unified is all about God's design for marriage. Yeah. And it's about us choosing to do marriage God's way. I mean, there's a lot of great material out there on marriage, but we have done a lot of marriage coaching. We do a lot of marriage coaching. And we ended up sharing a number of principles over and over with our clients. And they bug us. Why don't you make this into a class? Why don't you make this into a challenge? Get this information out there. This is new. This is different. To really look at God's design and our responsibility to do marriage God's way if we want marriage to be satisfying and fulfilling. And listen, this is for you. Don't check out if you want and need hope in your marriage, or if you need healing in your marriage. If you are like, I don't even know why I'm married, really, like, what's the purpose of my marriage? Or maybe you need to be encouraged in your marriage. You're like, I just want to be intimate. I want intimacy in every way, spiritually, emotionally, physically. I just don't feel, or here's one, maybe you feel separate. You just feel like, man, I just feel like I'm doing my life my way. My spouse is doing.
We kind of crossing the night occasionally.
Yeah, ships that cross in the night.
Down the hallway.
And
nice to see you.
We negotiate how to do life as roommates. Or, that is really the kind of feedback that we get. Or there's so much disagreement. And we're going to talk a lot about agreement and disagreement, because that really is at the core of God's design. Amos the prophet asked this wonderful rhetorical question. It applies to so many parts of life, certainly marriage. And what is the question?
How can two walk together if they don't agree?
And it's rhetorical. They cannot. So wherever we don't find understanding and empathy and agreement in our own lives with God, let's start there. This inside out reality that we talk about in all of our work. If wherever I'm out of agreement with God, I'm going to have problems.
This is where dis-ease, by the way, comes from. When we are separate in our own selves. We are separate. We're not in agreement with God as believers. That creates chaos and tension within ourselves. And the same applies most certainly in the marriage union when there is separateness, when we're in disagreement.
Yeah, that's so good. If I don't do relationships, if I'm not kind, I have a problem. Right? If I don't do business the way God designed, lack integrity, lack good work ethic, then I am going to have problems in that business. And in a marriage, if we don't do it the way God designed it, we have disconnection. We have separation. We have, we agree to disagree, and crazy, silly advice like that is really not very wise.
It's not wise.
And so we are launching into this Unified 6 Weeks Marriage Challenge. We're going to talk, a few episodes around this, but I want you to join us, and I want to encourage you to go to the description below in the podcast, register. It's cheap. It's like the cost of a date or whatever for 6 weeks, 90-minute classes. where we are going to get unified in every way. And so firstly, the first challenge, talk to us about what the first challenge is.
The first challenge is God's design for marriage.
And choosing to agree with it.
And well, of course, choosing to agree with it. So, right, like God's design for marriage is a reflection of himself. God is one. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. They're distinct, but they're one.
Yeah.
It's one God. And he created us in the garden in his image.
Right.
He created Adam, formed him out of the earth, mankind, not Adam as in the male, but mankind. And then he separated. He took the woman out of the man, who is an exact counterpart to him. And then he brings them back together, which is, the big story. This is how we started it in the garden. And at the end of the age, Jesus is coming back for the bride. It is the story that he tells us right from the beginning.
It's so good. And as Adam and Eve come together as one and one in flesh, they're able to create life.
Yes.
And you cannot create life human-wise. I mean, now we've got test tubes and all that, but it still goes back to the very basic science and fundamentals of God's design.
That's right.
And you cannot escape. And so when we agree to do marriage God's way, we approach it from a place of unity. We are distinct. God in Trinity is three persons, but it's one God. Our God is one. Same in marriage. Lesli and I are two persons, but in marriage, when we come together, we fit together and we're unified. And we're unified ideally in all parts of us. You don't find any disagreement in the Trinity. Father doesn't disagree with Jesus, disagree with Holy Spirit. Like, they are perfectly unified. And so Lesli and I are in God's design for marriage. And so for you, so what does that mean? Well, God made us, he carved us out of the dirt of the ground, the body, our world consciousness. It's how we relate to this world. Then he breathed his spirit into that dust. And that's the Spirit of God, the eternal part of us. We each have a spirit. And then the mixing of the Spirit of God with the body, the flesh, it says man became a living soul, mind, will, and emotion. And that is the marriage unified 6-week challenge right there. How? And this is important. We are going to get practical tools, practical ways to get unified in spirit, unified in mind, will, emotion, unified in body. And it is a bit of a mystery, but it's not. There is a blueprint for it. God has a blueprint. And we're going to talk about that and give tools so that we can get into agreement to God's design and have the wonder of his image and likeness inside of us, inside our marriage and our family. And as our kids then go on and have families of their own, that they're carriers of the image of God as well.
That's so good, sweetheart. And again, guys, remember that we are the light of the world. We are image bearers of God himself. All of us, if we're believers, we are image bearers. And in the design of marriage is about you, but it's not all about you. And foundationally, it's God's design to show the rest of the world, to demonstrate as man and woman come together as one, married, and produce more life. It is to reflect God in our homes. How are we doing? How are we doing when we go out into the world? Are we reflecting God? Are we actually being the image bearers? So when we talk about God's design for marriage, this really is foundationally, that's what it's about. It is to be image bearers of God's nature, 3 in 1.
Yeah, who is one. And that's it. And that word in the scripture, if you study it out in the Hebrew and in the Greek, that word where it says, the Lord our God is one, or that man would leave his father and mother and join to his wife and become one. That word means unified. It means distinct parts that come together perfectly and unify as one. And so that's a challenge. And how do we do that? Well, I promise you, God's design needs to have our agreement with it if we're going to experience it. First of all, we have to humble ourselves and come into agreement that God, you designed marriage. Like I used this before for the family, same way, God's design. If you design a car You design it to drive down the road. You don't design it to be a submarine and operate in the ocean. It's just not designed for that. Submarine's designed for that, but not a car. So God has a design for marriage, and we need to humble ourselves and agree to do it his way.
And you're going to get the benefits. You're going to produce the fruit out of that. You will be functioning as designed. We don't use a fork to, fix an outlet. I mean, like, right? Okay. So let's go on. Let's talk about, we're also going to be, the second challenge is going to be unified in spirit. So talk to us a little bit about that.
So I have a spirit. Lesli has a spirit. You have a spirit. Your spouse has, and each one of us are responsible to steward that spirit and really to grow in God, right? To connect to God and live my life ordered. Like when God designed us, he designed our spirit to dominate. Our relationship to him, our communion with him is to dominate how I think, and that generates how I feel, and that my will is surrendered to what I'm getting in the spirit, and that my flesh carries that out. And if I am not in agreement and alignment with God spiritually, if I'm not connected, if I'm not pursuing, if I'm not receiving life, I cannot be in agreement with God. And every time I'm out of agreement with God, I have problems. And if Leslie's not doing that, she's going to have problems. And if we're not doing that together in our marriage in a unified way, where we say we're ordering our marriage under the spirit and direction of the Spirit of God, and we're going to commune with the Spirit individually and together, and we're going to learn and grow and be transformed by that, we will not be unified in our spirit. You try to put, and I'm not picking on him, I'm just using the example. You try to put a Buddhist with a Christian in a marriage and see how the spiritual connection and oneness goes. It's not going to go well. They're
not of the same
oil
spirit.
And water. And you could extrapolate that on in any way, right? Well, it's okay. She has her journey and I have my journey. Well, that might be the case, but that's not God's design.
Yeah, you're not going to get the fullness. And again, that's not to pick on anybody, but anything that is outside of design is outside of design. And so you're not going to get the full benefit of the design.
Yeah. And so when we both are committed to growing our spirit with God and surrendering to him, and we do that together, and we're going to give you some tools in the challenge to do that. And then you'll go away and do it for the week, come back and report on it so that there's value that you get. But there's a lot more to that, but that's unified in spirit. What's the next challenge? Challenge number 3
is unified in mind, in our thinking.
Yeah. So as a man or woman thinks in their heart, so are they. It says in Proverbs 23:7. So my thinking is paramount to how I govern myself, how I perceive the world, what and it runs really our emotions even flow out of what we think. Our choices come from what we think. And so how we think matters. And so when we talk about being unified in thinking, what we're talking about is both of us being transformed in our thinking so that we agree with each other and God. Because we are on a journey, every one of us, to be transformed by the renewing of our mind in the image of Christ. If we don't do that, we have marriages that argue, that fight, that compete, that avoid, that hurt and offend, and choose to be offended, choose to separate parts of my life and thinking from another person. That's the price of not doing marriage as designed. It's the price of being separate, not one.
Right. We're going to, the challenge 4 and 5 are in this soul category of emotion and will. But just think how many of you out there who have children, your kids, if they want something, they know who to go to. Oh, if it's around this, I'm going to go hit mom up for this because dad was saying no, or vice versa. Guys, you are not demonstrating oneness and unity in thinking in your home. You are teaching your kids that you're not of the same mind. You're not, I'm sorry if that's going on.
And that's a great example. Here's another one. If I'm a saver and Leslie's a spender around money, we're going to have all kinds of challenges because we think very differently about money. Well, we just need to agree to disagree, some of the experts say. Let me tell you, they're no expert. Agreeing to disagree is basically saying, I am going to tolerate being disconnected from you and separate from
because
you.
we're not unified in our
money.
thinking around money or whatever it is.
And all that flows out of that. So I'm going to have my accounts and you're going to have your accounts. And we're going to, now I know I'm pushing some buttons because, well, we just found out that that's the way to do it. Listen, we're going to encourage you to go to the Lord around this. But wherever we have thinking that it, and I'm not talking about, I like vanilla ice cream and Leslie likes chocolate. And I build something out of it. Well, we're not in agreement on ice cream, so we're not going to have marriage by God. That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, we're talking about agreement. And just to go back a second around money and separate accounts. I don't want anybody to mishear that.
Yeah.
There are people, they're absolutely in agreement around money, and they might have separate accounts
Correct.
of the discretionary or not. I never get that right.
Right. As long as they're in agreement in how they're going about
Right.
it, and there's not anything underneath the surface that's causing a separation,
Right.
that's causing mine and yours, that's causing, my best interests are in somehow competition with your best interest. And I mean, money's just one. What about sex? What about parenting? What about where you live? All of those things come down to our thinking. And God's plan is not that we're clones, that we're exactly the same, but that we grow in our ability to understand each other's thinking, and especially put our thinking underneath God's thinking. And when we both come into agreement with God's way of thinking about things, guess what? Then we're in agreement about God, about how we think about things. And that creates intimacy, and it creates a unified relationship.
We'll be right back, guys. Sometimes challenges in marriage can feel overwhelming, especially when there are areas of separation around money, parenting, or sex, leading us to, oh, well, this is as good as it's going to get.
Most pain in marriage comes from being separate. God's design for marriage is oneness. Oneness is the prize of marriage.
But what is oneness practically in our day-to-day life? And how do we get there from here?
Hi, Dr. Randy and Lesli from the Family Reformation Project. We empower couples with practical tools and support to help break the cycles of separation.
We've turned our coaching sessions for couples into the unified 6-week marriage challenge.
Through 6 experiential classes and 6 challenges over 6 weeks, you will learn how to be unified in 6 key areas. Unified in design, spirit, mind, will, emotion, and body.
It's not too late to transform your marriage forever. Join us for the unified 6-week marriage challenge. Click on the link below to register today and get unified for the price of a date. All right, welcome back. We are talking about our upcoming 6-week marriage challenge called Unified. And we've talked about thinking. What does it mean to be unified in emotions?
Yeah, so we've covered the challenge to be in agreement with God's design for marriage, first of all, and then to be unified in spirit, and then to be unified in our thinking.
Yes.
And now the next challenge, week 4, is going to be being unified in our emotion. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to have the same emotion all the time, but it means this idea of unified means that I am in you and you are in me. That was Jesus's words in John 17. Father, that I'm in you and you're in me, let them be in us. And so how Lesli feels is in me and how I feel is in her, we share in this whole realm of how we as one are feeling.
Yeah, and listen, your emotions, again, it's coming in unification in all areas. And there is this, it causes separation. Well, women are so much more emotional than men are. Listen, if you take that thinking into your marriage, you've already put up a wall of separation. So we're not saying that men, and we're just going to stay with this example, that men are less emotional than women are emotional. It's not about that. It is being with each other in our emotions. It's if I'm having a big emotion or I'm very sad about something, it's not that Randy has to be sad, but he understands because he's with me in the emotion. I hope this is translating.
Yeah, and it's not that you said it, that I have to be sad, but the truth is when I am one with her in how I think, and when she's thinking and she's feeling sad, at a deep level of empathy, I'm sad too because I'm with you in your sadness. Now, you're not in this place of you being unified when you know you're chastising or criticizing how your spouse is feeling. Or you're telling them how to feel. Don't feel sad.
that way.
Don't feel
sad.
rejected. I didn't mean that. Don't feel that. I don't feel, I mean, and that happens all the time.
All the time.
And what that is saying is you are not unified in your emotions.
And listen, we've talked about this before. Your feelings, your emotions are generated
That's important.
by your thinking.
That's right.
We just talked about unified in mind, unified in our thinking. And our emotions flow. Every emotion you have, I promise you, neuroscience proves it, is generated by a thought. So in order to be fully unified in our soul, if we're unified in our thinking, we both have the mind of Christ. We're both in agreement with the way God thinks about something, then that's going to translate into the emotions. And they may be demonstrated differently. Each person is distinct.
Yes.
In their thoughts and their feelings, but it's about coming into agreement and unification.
Yeah, and that empathy that comes from oneness, from being unified. I cannot tell you truthfully how many times that Lesli and I are driving down the car and it's quiet for a moment, and all of a sudden we start talking at the same time about the same thing.
It's true.
The same emotion or the same circumstance. Like we are on the same page. Why? Well, because we're working these tools and these principles around doing marriage God's way, around coming into agreement with how he thinks, with what his spirit is doing, and then that drives how we feel together. And here's the goal. There is no separation. The more and more we are unified and we do marriage by God's design, we're not separate.
Listen, too, as we individually are seeking God with our whole heart, which is every believer's mandate, right? You'll find me when you seek me with your whole heart. As I am seeking the Lord and I'm putting on the mind of Christ and I'm listening to what the Father is saying in any given moment, in any given circumstance, and Randy's doing the same thing, we're in agreement. And God he's not going to talk to Randy and tell him something and tell me something that's contrary to that. That would be God dividing against himself. And we know he doesn't do that.
Yeah. And here's another clue that you're not unified like we're talking about. You're tolerating a lot of things in your relationship, right? I'll just put up with that. I'll just, I just don't even go there. I don't, he goes and he does this, or she goes and she does that.
You do your thing, I'll do my thing.
I'll tolerate it, because we all have to reach compromise. Well, compromise, again, is one of these things that is not God's design. Compromise is by definition where both parties lose to get something they want. How is that God's best?
Yeah, and this is a perfect place to pop this in. In the Old Testament, when all of the laws came into being, and Moses gave men the right to write a certificate of divorce, right? You guys remember that. Then Jesus comes on the scene, and the Pharisees come in, and they're challenging him on that. What does he do? He doesn't even respond to it. He points them right back to design. And what God says, that we are to be unified in our thinking and our emotions and the next thing on there, the challenge around.
Yeah, will. And here's a big one right here, right? My organ of choice, my will, what I choose, what Lesli chooses. And this is really clear and easy to see when you're not in agreement, when you're not unified around your choices, it's easy to see, right? I choose to be lenient with my kids when they mess up. Maybe a spouse chooses to be, and this isn't the case necessarily, but we're different in how we think about disciplining our kids, or we're different in how we think about sex and physical intimacy. We're different about how we think about money, about where we live, about how long it takes to get the honey-do list done. We have all of these things where we make different choices, and Frank, we want it my way.
Right. And we get into this place, just back up a bit on this compromise. That's what compromise is. Jesus said Moses gave that law because
The hardness of the heart.
The hardness of the heart.
Yes.
So I want you guys to catch that and tie that together. It's really important. This compromise, agreeing to disagree, is outside of design.
And tolerating, and it leads to problems. And a lot of marriages, and we deal with a lot in our marriage coaching, it's like, well, how do I get my spouse to give me my way or see things my way? And there's a fight for my way. And
what causes quarrels among you?
Oh.
Go back and read James 4.
And it's a reflection of our individual lives with God. We fight with God all the time, if you're honest, to have your way, or like for me, my way instead of God's way. And wherever I'm in disagreement with him and I want my way, I have consequences of that. And the same is true in marriage. And so we give you tools in the marriage challenge to be able to look at decisions that you're making, and we develop what we call a decision matrix. How will you agree to make decisions as one, unified? It's a powerful tool, and it really is revolutionary.
It is
to how people, live in their marriage and make decisions. So those
are the first 5. We're going to wrap this up, this challenge, around unified in flesh and our body. And we're going to have a real candid conversation around sex.
Did you hear how the tone of her voice changed? Yeah. What is it? I tell you, this is one of the major disagreements, pain points, challenges where couples and marriage they're disunified. They are not unified around meeting each other's needs sexually.
Yeah.
And even in the body, necessarily. Sometimes, I don't want you to go to the doctor. If we find couples that have, they don't want to spend the money, or they don't want to have this, like there's not agreement in how we meet one another's needs sexually or in our bodies. Mm-hmm. And some of you are listening and that's true. And you're like, man, if you got a tool to fix that, I'm in. And we do. Tuned. And we absolutely do. It doesn't mean it's necessarily, not going to require your work or challenge your thinking because there's a reason why you're experiencing what you are right now. There's always a reason why. Always. And it's typically our thinking. It's about how we think about ourselves or our spouse, or how we think about sex. God designed sex. He is for sex his way.
His way.
And he's very clear what that way is. And so it's vitally important that we understand to be unified in God's design for marriage, in our spirit, to be unified in our mind, how we think, in our emotions, how we're feeling, to share that as one in agreement and in unity, and our decision making, that we make things as one. And finally, how we relate to one another, meet one another's needs physically and sexually. It is a recipe for heaven on earth.
Indeed.
And some of you know our story. That has not always been the case in our lives, but we are experiencing right now the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Some of you know I'm talking about. We are married a number of years now. We have yet to have an argument. We have discussions.
Unity, oneness is the prize of marriage. So stay tuned, guys.
Yes, we hope to see you. Look below. Plan on joining us. We're going to have a few more podcast episodes around this to go a little bit deeper, but the 6-week marriage challenge called Unified. Join us. And remember,
whoever wins the family
wins the culture in the end. See you next time.
Soon.
That wraps up another inspiring episode of Transforming Families with Randy and Lesli. We hope that today's conversation has left you feeling empowered and equipped to take action.
Remember, transforming families begins with transforming ourselves. Let's be intentional, loving, and persevere. You're not alone. We're right here with you.
We believe Proverbs 24:3. Wise people are builders. They build families, businesses, and communities. Through intelligence and insight, their enterprises are established and endure.
Thanks for joining us today. We encourage you to stay connected with us on social media, join our email list, and learn more about our resources and classes at the Family School by visiting thefamilyreformationproject.com.
Remember to subscribe, share with your loved ones, and spread the word about transforming families. We'll see you on our next episode. And remember, whoever wins the family wins the culture in the end.